Praise the Lord, everybody. I've got a Bible study for y'all today. And I'm going to start a four-part series for this Bible study. And this four-part series is going to talk about the Christian race. And I'm going to go ahead and get in the scripture. I've got a lot to read today. I'm going to go into the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. And I'm going to read all my scriptures from the New King James Version. Alright, Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares, or in King James Version, besets us, and let us run with endurance, King James, for patience, the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So for the next four messages, I will be going over this topic, the Christian race. What is the Christian race? This is a race of faith based on your life and your walk with God. If you have been saved and born again, you are qualified to race in this race. It is a daily walk with God. And the finish line is heaven. Hebrews 11 gives us several examples of the witnesses, the cloud of witnesses, who raced in the race of faith and crossed the finish line no matter what. And going to start with Hebrews 11, chapter 5. Well, no, verse 4. Well, yeah, gonna do verse 4. Sorry. By faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, still speaks. So we don't know much about Abel, other than his sacrifice of animals to God and being murdered by his brother Cain. The reason he is in here is he knew what God required in a sacrifice, and he did not take a detour in sacrifice. Now Cain, he took a detour and offered the fruit of the ground. That's not acceptable to God. Hebrews 11, verse 5. By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. And we only have a couple scriptures talking about Enoch. We only get a couple verses in the Bible talking about Enoch, but he was a man who walked with God and lived for God all of his days until he was taken up by God. His lifelong service to God certainly gives him a place in the Faith Hall of Fame, which I call it. Hebrews 11, verse 7. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became the heir of the righteousness, which is according to the faith. So Noah feared God in society that was ungodly, that lacked the fear of God, the fear of the Lord. God decided to wipe out mankind, but Noah had his favor because of his reverence to God. Noah built an ark for years according to God's measurements until the flood came. Hebrews 11, 8 through 10. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So, Abraham, the beginning of God's people of Israel, the father of multitudes, and he followed an invisible God out of the city of Ur in Haran into a not-so-appealing Canaan land. He walked with God, having faith in the promise that God has for him, and that God had for him. Hebrews 11 and 12. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky, in multitude innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. Sarah, though she had a few lapses in faith in giving Abraham a child, is she still had faith after her mistake with matching Abraham with Hagar, and conceived well after childbearing age. Hebrews 11:17 and 19, 7 through 19. By faith, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, "In Isaac your seed shall be called," concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received in a figurative sense. So if we come back to Abraham, Abraham gets a second mention for his willingness to obey the voice of God to sacrifice Isaac on the mountain. Abraham had the faith that God will provide. God will provide, Jehovah Jireh. Oh, Abraham was willing to withhold nothing from God. God honored Abraham's obedience by providing a ram for sacrifice. And you know what Abraham did? He built an altar and called it Jehovah Jireh, God, the God who will provide. Hebrews 11:20 and 21. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. Now, this is about the blessing of the sons. Isaac blessed his sons Jacob and Esau, though Jacob stole Esau's blessing. Jacob blessed each of his sons. He prophesied unto them in the later chapters of Genesis. And the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. Giving a blessing is a huge deal. Giving a blessing is a huge deal in Israelite society around Abraham, Isaac's and Jacob's era. Verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. Joseph asked for his bones to be moved out of Egypt because he knew that someday Israel will be leaving Egypt around 400 years after the death of Joseph. Israel did obey Joseph's wish during the Exodus. Hebrews 11:23 through 29. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in earth, for he looked to the greater reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. So this is pretty much talking about Moses than the children of Israel. Moses had it good in the Pharaoh's household. Nonetheless, he forsook it to follow after God after his experience on Mount Sinai during his exile, after he killed the Egyptian man. He came back and stood for God in the face of Pharaoh. A person that, someone that used to be so close to him, he kept the directions for the Passover in Egypt, sparing the firstborn. And he even led Israel across the Red Sea. God told him to stretch out your hand over the Red Sea, and that's what he did. And he followed God through the 10 plagues and the crossing the Red Sea and onward, because he saw the power of God, the wonders of God. Hebrews 11:30 and 31, and I think this is my last one, or maybe not. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, when she had received the spies with peace. Now this is talking about, by faith Israel, under Joshua, obeyed the strange commands from God to circle the city of Jericho. Also the harlot Rahab helped 2 Israelite spies and asked to go with Israel. The spies told her to tie a red cord on her window. She and her household were saved while all Jericho was slain. Verse 32. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets. We have the judges, Gideon, who led an army of 300 against a large army of Midianites, Barak, who pretty much led the battle against the Canaanites under the instruction of the prophetess Deborah, and Samson, who, being blinded, asked God to give back his strength so that he may take down the Philistines in the house. You know what? He slain more Philistines in his death than he had in his whole life. And Jephthah, now this is an interesting one. He made a vow to God to offer to God the first thing he sees when he comes home. And his daughter ended up being the first thing he saw, so he offered her up to God, keeping his vow no matter how painful it was to keep it. It was, can you imagine having to sacrifice your own child to God? Then we have David, the man after God's own heart. The young lad who took down Goliath with a sling and a stone and with a sling and 5 stones and cutting off the Goliath's head. And last but not least, Samuel and all the other prophets of the Old Testament, such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and the other minor prophets who were unnamed in this chapter. If the writer of Hebrews 11 had enough time, he would have probably talked all about those prophets. So, when we're racing, we must lay aside any spiritual hindrances that affect our race. Any rebellion must be cast aside. Also, worldliness must be cast aside. Gonna read from 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. So worldliness weighs you down. It's not worth it to hang on to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and that drag you down. The world and the lust of it will pass away. Will it drag you down with it? Those who do the will of God, they shall abide. Now, the Titanic finally submerged underwater, straight down. Those still on it had 2 options: jump at the last second or be sucked down with it. If you don't let go of the world and the things of it, it will suck you down with it. We must also watch out for our personal sins that so easily trip us up and entangle and ensnare us. We have to keep warring against our personal sins and do not let them overcome us. We've got to keep fighting the good fight against it and temptation. We must run with patience and endurance and perseverance. We got to keep going. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. All the saints in Hebrews 11 faced so many difficult times and refused to throw in the towel. So must you and I. We've got to keep on enduring and persevering to the finish line. Look past all distractions in the world and look to Jesus. He's the author and the finisher of our faith. He made it possible for us to run this Christian race. Without him, we would have no hope to run this race, unless if you were of God's people, the Hebrews. Jesus Christ endured the stripes on his back. He endured the brutal beatings. He endured the crown of thorns shoved down on his head. He endured the carrying of the cross. He endured all the shame and the mocking that they were doing to him. He endured the crucifixion, the nails in his hands and feet. Not once did he give up. Not once did he throw in the towel. Not once did he back down. The salvation of the world was his goal. He went through all that even though he didn't have to. Now he is seated in honor and glory in heaven waiting for us to cross the finish line. In conclusion, the Christian race is a race we must race and to cross the finish line at all costs. It may be rough and difficult. Sometimes you'll have a lot of rough stretches. But by faith, even the size of a mustard seed, though we need more than a mustard seed, we can make it across the finish line to Jesus. We gotta have extraordinary faith. So stay tuned for the fundamentals in the Christian race in the coming weeks. God bless y'all in Jesus' name.